Good morning. Welcome to a Smart Knowledge Wealth Academy podcast. Before I get started today, I just want to let you guys know that follow me on Snapchat because I normally Snapchat daily and I've been silent for a bit. The reason is because I dropped my phone for the 100th time and it finally ruined the touchscreen. The touchscreen, actually, I was fortunate it didn't shatter, but unfortunate in the fact that the bottom section of it doesn't work now. So if the bottom section doesn't work, no matter how I rotate my smartphone, there's always sections of it that don't work that are necessary to Snapchat. So that is the primary reason why, and I've just been too busy to take it to the shop to get it fixed because the phone function, which I actually use, still works. So hopefully I'll take it in within the next week or so, and once I get it fixed, I'll be back to Snapchatting daily. For those of you that have no idea what I'm talking about, then follow me on Snapchat at SKWealthAcademy. Monday through Friday, I usually Snapchat about financial and wealth building topics. Friday and Saturday, I Snapchat on more life philosophy. So depending upon what interests you, you can follow me every day, or you could just follow me on those days that appeal to the topics that you like. Okay, so I think that's about it. Please do know that this will probably be one of my last YouTube videos I released, being that really the whole purpose of me releasing, actually this isn't a video, but these podcasts on YouTube as well as the other videos I do release on YouTube. The primary purpose is to reach as many people as possible with my message, and YouTube for years now has been demonetizing all my videos, so literally I get like pennies out of making my videos, so it doesn't really make sense for me to keep releasing YouTube videos on this platform, and especially since I've checked with a number of my friends I know subscribe to my channel, and they all tell me like they haven't received any notification of the last like 10 videos I've posted. So just from the numbers alone, because if you go check, I've had some videos in the past that I've gotten 30, 40, 50,000 views or even more, and at a very minimum I would get at least several thousand views per video, and they've been dropping off to just a few hundred, and it seems odd that I would get 40,000 views with 1/3 of the subscribers. So since my subscribers have actually tripled, my views have been plummeting, which doesn't make any sense at all, because obviously people are so interested to subscribe to my channel and more subscribers are subscribing, but all of the people I know that are my friends that I've checked in with said they don't receive any notification anymore. So YouTube and Google, obviously they censor. There's been other things that have happened. Just this past month, it's June 30th, if you want to know the release of this particular podcast, where I saw something that Google was censoring other competitors of theirs as far as their search algorithm was concerned. So other corporations that competed for similar services Google is providing, they were burying them in the results. So Google certainly done that to my other company. They buried me in my results because some of the very same searches on Baidu, I'm actually number one. I'm number one on Baidu, which is a Chinese internet search engine, where I'm like on the 3rd or 4th page for the exact same search on Google. So I hate any corporation that censors people. So I'm probably going to move off of YouTube permanently pretty soon. So if you like the content of this podcast, please do me a huge favor, because I think this podcast, I sincerely mean this, I believe the topic of this podcast and the topic of my next 2 or 3 podcasts are going to be some of the most important I've ever released. I mean, totally for all the whatever it's been now, 8-9 years I've been YouTubing, that these are going to be some of the most important ones. So if you like the content, please do pass it on to all your friends and family, because again, I'm only concerned about reaching as many people as possible to make as many people as possible think. Okay, so the topic for today is I'm going to talk about why I believe that people are so willing to easily compromise their principles today. In other words, I would say in my childhood, I saw people have much stronger foundations, like the foundations to the principles could not be shaken, but today people are easily moved off of their principles. And by voicing this criticism, I'm not saying I'm perfect, right? Because a lot of times, anytime anyone voices criticism about something, they say, well, who are you to criticize that? I'm just basically giving my opinion. So everyone has an opinion. Doesn't mean I'm infallible, but I do make a commitment to myself to be a better human being every year. So I know I still have faults to correct every year. I try to correct more and more faults, and then if I make mistakes, then I never try to, commit the same mistake twice and moving forward in life. So that's something that I try to adhere to as much as possible. So by no means am I saying I'm infallible and look at me, I'm perfect. No, no, no. I have my faults. There's nobody in this world that's without fault. We all have our faults, but I think it's also a helpful and healthy exercise to look at why people's commitment to principles and integrity and honor and courage are not as strong today. And I really believe that's true. It's not as strong as the principles I saw in people when I was younger. And there are 3 reasons I think that's so. And I'm going to go into the reasons today. And I am going to come out with a podcast in the future about basically the things I see as far as that give rise to the comment that people have less commitment to their principles today. But today I'm just going to go into the reasons why I believe that is. So number 1 is I believe there's a lack of struggle that binds communities together, which gives individuals a sense of purpose. Okay, so I'm not saying there's a lack of struggle in today's world, but it's a lack of a specific kind of struggle that binds communities together to work towards a common good that gives individuals a strong sense of purpose in life today. Because certainly there's greater economic struggle today than at any time during my lifetime, because there's more wealth inequality today, and that's just a fact today than during any point prior in my lifetime. But on the same hand, there's been advancements in technology, certainly over the past couple of decades, that have made life way more comfortable than at any other time in my lifetime as well. So even if you are struggling economically from a standpoint of just having a better quality of life because of technology, I think that has happened as well. So poverty today, given like the same purchasing power as 20 years ago, is not as hard as poverty 20 years ago, given, I'm saying the exact same purchasing power. So again, I think as far as economic struggle is concerned, that doesn't necessarily bind people together, because I think those in power today in government, those in power today as far as legislators in the military-industrial complex that are creating these unnecessary wars all over the world today and killing innocent people, those in power today in politics and in banking are successfully using economic struggles to divide and tear us apart, and also to promote their narrative that's a dog-eat-dog world. So that's how you better act. So I think people's principles get tossed out the door like yesterday's garbage, because they are buying into this dog-eat-dog world that divides and separates and tears people apart, instead of having a struggle that actually unites communities. So, okay, this isn't going to be the best edited podcast because I'm just kind of talking off the top of my head. So I hope you bear with me, because I do know I have some points, and I hope I can remember them all. There's definitely some really strong points that I want to make in regard to this. So let's start actually with Sebastian Junger. For those that don't know him, he wrote The Perfect Storm, but I actually never read that book, but I'm reading a book he wrote called Tribe, which I find really interesting, because in that book he talks about how people miss traumatic experiences that they've been through because of the fact of the brotherhood or the sisterhood, if you're female, that they found in these experiences. So even the experiences in which their life for a condensed, really intense period of time was way worse than it was after this traumatic experience ended. And even in, because he speaks of instances of warfare, even in combat, he talks about how people miss these soldiers who come home and then be depressed because they didn't have that sense of community in which they had the the common ground they were fighting for that gave them a sense of purpose in life. And that's really, really interesting because some of the things he talks about, let me just, I'm actually on my Kindle here and I'm looking through some of the pages that I bookmarked on my Kindle because I want to read you some of the things he said in this book and some of the questions because I think they're really interesting even though I'm only about 60% way through this book right now. So okay, one thing he said, he wrote, how do you become an adult in a society that doesn't ask for sacrifice? How do you become a man in a world that doesn't require courage? And I find that these questions are really interesting because I think in today's world, when we're talking about, okay, I'm not talking about people in poverty or people that are really struggling economically, but those that grew up pretty much middle class or even upper class that weren't forced to face any kinds of struggles, that really were very entitled because their parents took care of everything for them and didn't really introduce struggle into their lives, and those that didn't involuntarily choose anything that was really hard in their lives. I think that is actually the problem we have in society today, because at the very top of the pyramid in politics, in government, I think we have a lot of entitled people that never really had to struggle with anything before they reach these positions of power. So they don't really understand the reality of life, and that's why they're leading us down a terrible, terrible path today. So an interesting thing that Junger also wrote was, he said, genetically we're built to really desire struggle, because he wrote about how, let me see if I can find this, just bear with me for a second. He basically wrote how it takes about 25,000 years for genetic adaptations to really show up in human beings. And given that we early humans were hunters and gatherers, and we had to basically depend upon other people, and he postulated, he wrote, early humans would most likely have lived in nomadic bands of about 50 people. And he said they would experience high levels of accidental injuries and deaths, and they would have he said they would have countered domineering behavior by senior males by forming coalitions within the group, and they would have been utterly intolerant of hoarding or selfishness. So he says a problem that has arisen since the Industrial Revolution and the modernization of society is that there is no punishment now that is enforceable for behavior that is considered bad for the entire group, which is interestingly one of the main principles I have of SKWealthAcademy, because I believe that colleges and universities shuttle young adults to choose the best paying jobs irrespective of the consequence it can have on society. So even if it has a terrible negative consequence on society, they're still encouraged to go back after the best paying jobs and just to have these selfish motivations and not to consider the negative effects on society. So to be much like a George Soros, who had that infamous 60-minute speech in which he said, I care not about the negative social consequences. He even said, I cannot care. I'm just paraphrasing, but I remember saying something like, I cannot care about the negative social consequences of my actions. He said, all I care about is making money, period. And I feel that a lot of universities and colleges shuttle young adults into that wrong choice as well. And one thing I want to make real quick is, if you're listening to this on YouTube, if you're listening to this on iTunes podcast, go to my YouTube channel, Smart Knowledge U. Do find this podcast, and you can look in the YouTube description below, and you'll see like SK Wealth Academy podcast in the title. I'm not sure I'm titling the full title, but just search for like SK Wealth Academy podcast under my Smart Knowledge U channel. You'll find it, and you'll find a lot of links to a lot of the references I'm making. So if you want to see that George Soros 60 Minutes interview, I'll put that in the reference. I'll put a lot of other things that I'm going to refer to throughout this podcast in the YouTube description. Okay, so an interesting note that he made in regard to modern society today was, he said, Okay, this is what he wrote. He said the accumulation of personal property allowed people to make more and more individualistic choices about their lives, and those choices unavoidably diminished group efforts toward a common good. So he said the reason nomadic tribes didn't encounter this is because the only physical possessions they could have was what they could actually carry with them because they were nomadic. So, for example, if they're American Indians who were very nomadic because they had to really follow at times, say, the migration of the buffalo because they need to hunt the buffalo to eat, to take its hide, to provide clothes and give them warmth and so on and so on. So they were very migratory and nomadic, and they could only basically possess what they could carry with them. So there wasn't a great inequality between the richest person in the tribe and the poorest person in the tribe. It was very, very egalitarian as far as material wealth was concerned because of the fact you were limited by what you could carry with you. And so that today is not true, obviously, anymore because you have 0.1%, probably much less than that, because Oxfam did a study, and Oxfam is like a non-government organization or a non-profit organization, not sure which one. But they did this study and they found that, I think in 2016, the 8 richest people own the same wealth as 50% of the world's poorest people. So as much wealth, 8 people, as 3.5 billion people. And in reality, it's probably more like the 3 richest families own more wealth than the 80% of this world, because the way they were able to derive the statistic is through public records. We all know the wealthiest people in the world, they don't basically provide any, they don't report their income. They all shelter their wealth. So we're not getting the true 8 wealthiest people in the world. We're only getting that through public records like income tax returns and so forth. So the real wealthiest people in the world are never the ones that are on like the Fortune 5, not the Fortune 500 list. I mean the Forbes magazine, like 500 wealthiest people in the world or whatever it is, the 100 wealthiest people or 50 wealthiest people. That's never reality, because there's always like oil sheiks from the Middle East that aren't on that list. There's always kings and dictators from certain African nations that have far more wealth than the wealthiest, so-called wealthiest people on that list that are never listed. So the wealth inequality is just stunning. And if you look at even the so-called wealthiest nations in the world, again, it's like the 0.1% of the wealthiest people have the same wealth as like 99.9% of the rest of the country, which is ridiculous. So that kind of disparity did not exist in nomadic tribes. So that's why people had to work for a common good, because the fact is, if they were selfish and they tried to hoard, that would basically impede the probabilities of survival for the entire nomadic tribe of, say, 50 people. And they would do one of two things, because American Indians, interestingly enough, as a nomadic tribe, didn't have jails. And it's not like they didn't encounter bad people, because this is how they punished people that would try to hoard too much wealth or that acted against the interests of their tribe or their nomadic population. Is they would, one, straight up execute that person. So that person, like seeing that person was executed, they didn't have an incentive to act badly, and they would regulate themselves, their poor behavior. Even if they were selfish, greedy people, they would self-regulate that behavior and control those impulses, because they saw other people that acted like the way they wanted to act got executed. Or number 2, they would ostracize them, which basically was a death sentence anyways, because once they were kicked out of the tribe, even though they weren't executed, that person couldn't survive, because they depended upon the skills of the entire tribe for food to eat every day, and they also depended upon the protection of their tribe against enemy attacks from other enemy tribes. So without the protection of that tribe, if they were just found as an ostracized member that's kicked out of the tribe, a lone person, they're unlikely to be taken in with another tribe, but if they're found, they're just likely to be killed by another enemy tribe. So for that reason, you didn't get this kind of bad behavior that we get today that not only is accepted, that people praise other people for it. Because you can't imagine the number of people I've encountered that I'll give you like an anecdotal story. Like, I don't know this person, but this person was a friend of a friend. And that guy that Jordan something, can't remember, Belfort? I'm not sure if I'm getting his name right, but I'm not going to look it up on the internet because it's not really that important. But the guy about which the movie The Wolf of Wall Street was being made about, he was being brought into the city I'm in and on some kind of speaking engagement, and then a friend of a friend noted, "Oh, I can't wait to go hear this guy speak because he's my hero." And then other times when I've asked people who do they look up to, you know, just in general conversation I've had just with strangers, like, who do you look up to? Other people say Warren Buffett, and I'll say, like, why? Because he's a billionaire. I want to be like him, which is ridiculous because not only is this the bad behavior that gets people so much obscene wealth is accepted, but it's admired by people, which is the crazy thing to me, which is the absolutely ridiculous thing to me. So interesting that thing also that Junger speaks about. Although I'm getting a little bit off track, I did note this in the bookmarks of this book as I read it. I do want to just discuss this real briefly. He noted, which I thought was really interesting, that even as early as the 1600s, so 1612, he said, Spanish authorities noted in amazement that 40 or 50 Virginians had married into Indian tribes, and that even English women were openly mingling with the natives. And it said at that point, whites had been in Virginia for only a few years, and many who joined the Indians would have been born and raised in England. So the interesting aspect is, he said, even though a lot of colonial Englishmen deserted their English tribes to go join the American Indian tribes, including even women, he said very rarely, he said it almost never happened that the opposite happened, where American Indians would desert their tribes to go join the British. And the reason for this that he gave was because it was a very puritanical society. He said, number one, women were treated very, very unfairly. So he said American Indian tribes actually gave birth to much fewer children than the English tribes that had settled in America. So that was one benefit to the woman who wanted to be able to have that choice. And then number two, they found American Indian tribes to be much more egalitarian, even for men. So they said that because they were so egalitarian, sometimes even that when, say, a woman deserted and the Englishmen that were settling in America sent out search parties, sometimes the women would hide because they did not want to be found and they wanted to stay with the American Indian tribes they joined. And I don't want to romanticize this too much because I'm not saying that there was nothing bad about American Indians and that the Englishmen were all evil, because obviously that's not true, because there were some very savage behaviors that American Indians engaged in when they attacked each other as well. But I'm just saying that a lot of history books have things wrong, because when I was a child growing up in the United States, all we learned that were American Indians are savage, right? We never learned, at least I didn't as a child, never learned anything about the positive things about American Indian government, the fact that women held just as much power politically in their tribes, and even though men in American Indian tribes could only be the deciders, women could actually have all the voting power, could vote the American Indian men out of power if the American Indian men who were in power acted terribly. So we didn't learn any of these things that were good, but we only learned the bad, and then vice versa for the settlers. We only learned things that were good, we never learned things that were bad. Or when we learned about European history, for example, we didn't learn terrible things that the Catholic Church did, just atrocities they committed during the Spanish Inquisition. I mean, we did learn about the Spanish Inquisition, and but the atrocities were really glossed over. We didn't learn about how many people they actually killed. We didn't learn the details of like how they tortured and killed so many people in Europe during the Spanish Inquisition, and the fact that they would slowly kill people by sticking paws through their anus, up through their mouths, and even that Christopher Columbus would behead, the natives that he found on Hispaniola. I believe he beheaded them and then would put their heads on spikes just to ensure that they would do whatever he ordered them to do. So we didn't learn about any of these kind of atrocities. So, I don't want to romanticize everything. That's not my point. But the point I'm trying to make is that when we look at the reason why people bind together in tribes and want to be a part of a tribe, we can't be manipulated. Because I've always said that human psychology is one of the most important things to really, really get to the core of and to understand, because those in power have studied, I guarantee you they studied human psychology and they understand it way better than most of us do. And they understand that we have a need. See, this thing that Junger said about adaptations to the human gene pool really taking about 25,000 years to show up. Well, we are hunters and gatherers, so that's where our need for struggle comes in, because that's still genetically imprinted upon us, right? But of course, we don't have to go hunt for our food, because most of us, including me, would die because I don't know how to hunt for food. So if we really had to hunt for our food, that'd probably wipe out like 99% of the population in America, because there's probably only, I don't know actually how big the hunting community is in America, but I can't imagine it's greater than 10%. There's probably closer to 5%. I'm just guessing off the top of my head, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. But if we had to really hunt for our food and we couldn't go to the local Ralph's store if you're in California, or Trader Joe's, and buy our food, 95% of us would probably die within a month. So that need to struggle is within us, but the people in power today are so clever, and they know this, that they'll put us into these tribes. Remember I said that people have unprincipled principles today because they're not engaging in struggles that have a common goal that unites people with a sense of purpose. But the people in power understand that we have a need for struggle, so they put us into these struggles, for example, like political struggles, which really is a false paradigm. Like they'll say, oh, Democrats and Republicans are so different, and so we want you to fight, and we want you to engage in ad hominem attacks and engage in racial slurs and hate speech and just attack each other this way. And this is how they manipulate our need to struggle, by putting us in these racial divides and these political divides and these divides that don't bind us together as a community for the common goal and give our lives a greater sense of purpose, which is the real struggle that we need. But they use the lack of struggle, say, that the middle class or the upper class has today, to divide and conquer us by putting us into these false paradigms of struggle that should not exist. So they're just basically manipulating us. And what's even worse is that in some Western countries, they create the very conditions that put us into involuntary struggle, like economic struggle, because it's the banking government paradigm in everywhere around the world that is creating a complete collapse of the purchasing power of fiat currencies, that's creating economic struggle all over the world. And at the same time, because they realize that there would be violent revolt, the type of what we're seeing in Venezuela today, that in those countries where they're able to avoid it, they say, okay, let's just give these people handouts, because we're in control of the monetary system. We create money out of thin air all the time by just all it is just digital bytes that have zero intrinsic value. It doesn't cost us anything. So let's just appease these people by giving them what they need. And what I mean by that is that the U.S. government has provided food stamps. So let me tell you how that's when people say it's entitlement. It's not really an entitlement, because it's a way to get people to blindly comply to people in positions of power in government. I don't even like to call them government officials, because government runs itself more like a business today, just for the benefit of government officials and not for the benefit of people that governments are really supposed to serve. So these government executives, they'll make a decision and say, look, if we don't give people food stamps in the United States, they'll riot like has happened in Venezuela. So what they do is they put 1 out of every 4.5 people of working age in America on food stamps for like the last 7 or 8 years. And now I know you've heard that statistic that's more like 1 in every 7 Americans are on food stamps, or at least some of you may have, and those of you that have never heard that statistic as quoted by the independent media a lot, that 1 out of every 7 Americans on food stamps, are probably shocked by how many people are on food stamps. But that's 1 out of every 7 Americans when you take the entire American population. So I get the 1 out of every 4.5 American food stamps, and it's been like that for the last 7 years, since about 2009 or 10. I think about 2010. It's been like 1 out of every 4.5. If you look at the working age population, I'm not going to take the working age population to be what the U.S. government says it is, because they say it's age 15 to 64, right? But how many 15 to 18-year-olds do you know that are working full-time? Because that means, if they're working full-time, that means there's no 15 to 18-year-olds in high school. That the dropout rate of high school is 100%, which is ridiculous. And then you have a good percentage of people still going to college, university, which I think is a waste of your money unless you're going to a specialized degree. But that is a conversation for another podcast or vlog. But so you see how they're overestimating, right, the working force. So I say I have redefined the working population in America as age 19 to 65, which I think is much more reasonable. So if you look at the number of Americans that are age 19 to 65, which is 193 million people approximately in 2016, and out of this group, 44.2 million were receiving food stamps. That's 1 out of every 4.5 Americans that needed food stamps just to be able to buy food for themselves and their families to survive. So think about this. If the government revoked food stamps for 1 out of every 4.5 working age Americans, do you not think that America would denigrate very, very rapidly into the situation that's happening in Venezuela as I speak right now? And for those of you that have no idea what I'm talking about, just go look it up on the internet. What is going on in Venezuela today? Because I know, again, the mainstream media often censors things that are going on in countries where the devaluation of currency has been so great, because they don't want you to know about what your future is going to look like, because this future is bleak future in Venezuela has been basically imposed upon them by central bankers that have destroyed the purchasing power of their money. Now it's interesting because, of course, the government of Venezuela is trying to prevent people from realizing the truth. So they have like an economic government executive that's saying, this is what he said in 2015, and he published a pamphlet saying 22 keys to understanding the economic war. He said, quote, inflation does not exist in real life. When a person goes to a shop and finds that prices have gone up, they are not in the presence of inflation, end quote. So he basically said inflation is only the result of greedy people that are raising prices for their products, and it's nothing to do with the inflation rate that is literally hundreds of percent in Venezuela right now, which is ludicrous. And then on top of that, I can't remember who it was. It was either the finance minister in Venezuela, or it might have even been the president, but you would have to like Google this. But a government official in Venezuela actually threatened to jail any Venezuelan journalist that actually quoted the real inflation rate that contradicted the fake inflation rate the Venezuelan government was publishing. And interestingly enough, people say that, oh, this kind of tyrannical behavior by governments is new. This is not anything new. This kind of tyrannical behavior by people in positions of authority has been going on for centuries, for millennia. Is nothing new, because in Virginia, remember I told you they had a lot of people defecting to go join American Indian tribes because of the more egalitarian nature of their societal structure and the sharing of community tasks and the sharing of power that made them feel they had a greater sense of purpose in life. Well, guess how the authorities in Virginia and other colonies reacted to these significant numbers of defections? They basically imposed severe penalties on anyone who took up with American Indian tribes, and they said that they inflicted very severe penalties on anyone that was caught defecting or trying to defect to an American Indian tribe. So I don't think Junger, I can't remember off the top of my head, I don't think he actually went into what the severe penalties exactly were, the specificities of it, but he did say the penalties that they imposed were severe enough to highly discourage people from defecting. So it's really interesting that how people try to, people in positions of power have forever tried to impose limitations on people's freedom of choice and on their happiness as well. Point 2, just to sum up point 1, I think one thing, I'm going to just give you a preview of my solutions podcast. So one of the solutions as far as finding a lack of engaging in struggle today for the common good of a community that gives your life a sense of purpose, answer the question, what are you willing to die for? Because I've actually asked a number of people, a number of strangers I just met out in social settings that question, and surprisingly most people don't have an answer to that question. I think it's really important to have an answer to that question. And again, I'll go into more detail in the solutions podcast. But the ones that do, also I think they give me a weak answer, because most of the times it's like, I'll die for my family. Of course you love your family. I say it's a weak answer not because of the lack of integrity of the answer. Of course it's a great answer, because if you love your family, you'd be willing to die to protect your family. But outside of that, I'm saying, what are you willing to die for besides just family? Outside of family, what are you willing to die for? So that's just something to marinate upon until I get into my solutions podcast, and we'll address that question a little much more in detail. Okay, so let's get to number 2. And again, I'm giving 3 reasons why I believe people have such flexible and shaky principles today. So number 2 is, I think it's the failure of our institutional academic system. It's not really the failure of education, because I've always said that the best education comes outside of the institutional academic system. So people that still read a lot on their own, that always, because I think education is a process from birth to death. So it doesn't end when you finish high school, if that's the farthest you go. It doesn't end when you finish university, if that's the farthest you go. It doesn't end with master degrees or PhDs, if that's as far as you go. Education is a lifelong process, and I believe actually the greatest portion of it will actually happen outside of the institutional academia system, because I think the institutional academic system does a horrible job in ensuring that people are well grounded in critical thinking skills. So, for example, people apply, the reason I say people have such shaky foundations for principles today is that they apply their principles inequitably across people. In other words, like they will think that an evil act committed against people that look like them or think like them is way worse than the exact same evil act committed against people that don't look like them or don't think like them. So instead of just saying, for example, like, this is a really simple example, but instead of just saying like terrorism is wrong across the board because evil is evil. So whether it's terrorism committed against white people, terrorism against brown people, terrorism against yellow people, they're all equally deplorable. People, unfortunately, put different values on human life depending upon whether they look like them or think like them. So, for example, let's talk about the recent, according to when I'm making this podcast, not according to when you might be listening to it, Manchester terrorist bombing at the Ariana Grande concert, in which I believe 22 people were killed and 100 some people were injured. The point I want to make is when even far more worse terrorist attacks happen against other people, first of all, the mainstream media doesn't pick it up. So people are, when I would make this point in conversation with other people, they're saying, what do you mean far worse terrorist attacks? Those are the worst that happen. It's the worst that happens against Europeans or Americans. So it's reported in the mainstream media the most, but it's not the worst by any sense of, as far as how many people die or even other injuries that result from the attack, like severe injuries that will impede upon the quality of life of people. Not by any means. If I say, how come nobody talks about all the terrorist attacks in Kabul and Afghanistan that happened? Because the terrorists are killing innocent people there too. The people that are dying are women and children, just like in Manchester. And in fact, I think it was at the end of May, so just a couple weeks after the Manchester bombing, there was a terrible attack, I think near the Indian embassy, in which 4 times as many people died. So actually, I think 5 times as many. I think it was 100 some people died, and another 300 were injured. And nobody even talks about that. And there's, I think about, if you go check on Google, there's like 2 or 3 attacks every month in which there's like 12 people killed, 18 people killed, 20 people killed, and they're all innocent people. So it's equally as deplorable, but people don't look at those situations equally as deplorable. So that's the only problem I have with the fact that people's critical thinking skills are compromised, and not just saying evil is evil or a bad act is a bad act, but they grade how bad or how evil something is depending upon if it's committed against people that look like them, think like them, and live in the same country as them, and not just whether it's right or wrong. So, other interesting points about why I think education does such a poor job of teaching critical thinking skills. And here's the thing I don't understand either, because I've often heard people object to anyone discussing atrocities committed, the exact same types of atrocities committed against people that are not members of their tribe, because they say, well, it diminishes the importance of the atrocities committed against my tribe, so I'm not going to let you divert people's attention away from the pain and suffering my tribe is feeling right now by discussing the atrocities committed against other tribes. And I don't know, because I don't get it. So if someone gets it, just please put it in the comments below if you disagree with me. But I don't think it diminishes the importance at all, because people, I think we're discounting people's intelligence if we're saying people can't realize that, yes, something atrocious and something terrible that was a terrible act committed against people that look and think like you, or people that are of the same culture as you, that people are not going to diminish the severity and the atrocity of that act by acknowledging a similar atrocity or even a greater atrocities committed against people of another color, religious belief, culture. I mean, I think people can get that both are equally atrocious, and but people are so afraid of attention being diminished from, the atrocities committed against their people. They don't want to acknowledge atrocities committed against others, and I don't get that at all, because I think we're really underestimating the intellect of people. That people can understand that, hey, wrong is wrong. So it is not going to diminish if we discuss something that is wrong committed against another people is not going to diminish the fact that people are then going to say, hey, I don't think that what was committed against people of your culture is not wrong. That just makes no sense whatsoever. And that's what I don't get, and that's what I bemoan, is that I think that not only is there a diminishing of our critical thinking skills thanks to institutional academics today, but I think that people are also not giving enough credit to people's critical thinking skills that still do exist today. So they are further dividing people by not wanting to look at things in, basically, I believe there should only be two tribes, a tribe of morality and the tribe of immorality. But we want to further cut up the tribe of morality and the tribes of immorality by, religious beliefs, by cultural beliefs, by nationality, by political beliefs, and there's no need to dissect it, because right is right and wrong is wrong, and that's just the way that I believe it should be. And just going back to this point of a lack of critical thought today and how it's being diminished, and I'm not saying there's no critical thought, because obviously there's a lot still out there, but I think it certainly has been diminished greatly, and I think it's a deliberate diminishing of critical thinking skills in our institutional academic system, being imposed upon us by those in positions of power, because they know thinkers won't be happy with what they're doing to society. So they don't want us to have the ability to think, and they want us to act just on a visceral, emotional level, and to divide us into these tribes. So we're not thinking rationally anymore. Go to this video that I'm going to put up by Derren Brown, who is this pretty well-known NLP, neuro-linguistic programming expert in the UK, and he did this social experiment called Push to the Edge. I believe that's it, but if it's not, you can find a correct link in the video description on the YouTube uploading. So just go to my YouTube channel, Smart Knowledge U, and check this video, this podcast out, and it'll be in the video description below, where Derren Brown did this social experiment called Push to the Edge, where he wants to see how far people would go, what kind of behavior they would engage in that most people in society would look at as extreme, even though they are not really people that are living on the in the fringes of radicalism or extremism, and he wants to see if he can actually push them into believing or to committing an act of murder. And it's really, really interesting what happens. And of course, he doesn't push these people into murdering people, but just go watch it, because I know I'm not explaining it well, but you'll be shocked at how far people can be pushed just by getting these people to bend blindly and comply blindly to the orders of people in positions of authority. So here's how part 2 actually ties into part 1, because remember part 1 I said we've been genetically conditioned as hunters and gatherers with a genetic imprint in our DNA to have a desire to actually struggle to form some kind of bond with our community, but that the people in power today have been able to co-opt that need to misdirect us into struggles that are destructive to humanity instead of constructive. So we should be engaging in these struggles that are constructive to our communities instead of destructive. And the lack of critical thinking skills obviously is going to allow those in power today to manipulate us and drive us into destructive struggles. So just to give you an example of this, I was thinking about a conversation I had with a friend of mine that told me, when I told her about how the U.S. government, through the leaks provided through NSA documents provided to WikiLeaks by Edward Snowden, and also by certain talks by, I can't remember his exact position, but I know he had a high position in the NSA, former NSA staffer William Binney, came out and said the U.S. government is spying on everyone all around the world, and through these various exploits that are in, say, Microsoft Windows, where they're able to basically look into your computer hard drives and see what's going on, look at all your activity on the internet. They're able, through Facebook, they're downloading all the information that people willingly post all about their lives and all the photos to build profiles on everyone. And my friend said, well, I could care less if they're looking at my emails, listening to my phone conversations, downloading all my Facebook apps, because what does that have to do with me? I'm not doing anything wrong, so I don't care if they could download all they want, because it's never going to affect me. And the way I responded to her is that I said, I don't think you're looking at this the right way, because if you don't care about your privacy is an integral and inseparable part of freedom, then you're saying you really are not caring about your freedom. And her response was like, of course I care about my freedom. How do I not care about my freedom? Because what does that have to do with me? Because it's just not going to impact me. I said, you don't know that. I said, for now, that holds true, but you don't know that in the future. And just to try to make my point, I said, if you don't care about your privacy and you don't see the link it has to your freedom, then hand me your laptop, hand me your Mac Air book, give me all your passwords to all your social media, all your email, and then I'll give it back to you in a couple days. And she said, why would I do that? I'm not going to do that. And I said, okay, you don't trust me as a friend to look at all the stuff that you're posting publicly, that you know, the information that's been leaked online through NSA documents, that the government is collecting on you. You don't, but you would allow strangers to collect this information on you. And she said, I don't want you to know because I know you personally. But she said, I could care less what strangers are gathering about me, because I don't know them. So who cares? Who cares what they know about me? About personal things I might not want you to know about me. These people that know me, they could know whatever they want. But I said, look, you're only thinking about yourself. Selfishly. You're not thinking about the good of the community, which fits into this whole argument again, that the modernization of society has gotten us way where when we were small tribal nomadic tribes of 50 people, if you acted outside the interest of the community, you either be executed or you be ostracized, which was a death sentence. But people don't have that today anymore. So it's very easy for people to act very selfishly outside of the best interests of their community, and just have an ego-driven impulse and always just feed their ego and never think about anyone else. And I said, well, what if you're going to be affected indirectly? Because I said you can't possibly know about all the personal behaviors of all your good friends. So what if some of your good friends are very politically active? You don't know about that. And because of that, you are specifically being looked at right now, which is a possibility. And then what if in the future your friend is arrested, and then you're brought in and you're arrested? And I said, by you not caring about the greater good of the community, that could affect you in the future. And then she kind of got it, but she still said, well, I don't think that's going to happen because I know my friends. I said, that's ridiculous. You don't know all your friends and all the political activism of your friends, and you don't know what they could be doing. So that could happen to you in the future. That's one way. And I said, that's not the only way. There are multiple ways this could come back to blow back on you. Guess what? Guess what happened? Because she did not care, she actually was one of the few unfortunate people that had her laptop bricked by the ransomware virus. So she was infected with the ransomware virus and then had to spend, I can't remember what a Mac Airbook cost, but like $1,000? $1,000 on the new Mac Airbook, $1,200. So she was out of $1,200 because she did not care and she was directly affected. So this whole thing of this whole selfishness. Not only it's actually, I want to make sure I phrase this correctly. I think it's a lack of critical thinking that enables us to be selfish. And if we were actually trained to critically think, I think that a lot of our selfishness would disappear. And so we would become united in struggles that actually unite us instead of divide us. So I find it amazing how disconnected people are from a cooperative society. And again, like people that say, I have no reason, I don't see any reason to shut down my Facebook account. I'm never going to shut down my Facebook account. And then these same people, I'll see them turn around and yell at someone for littering on the street. And they don't see the hypocrisy of these two opposition viewpoints that they hold, of these conflicting viewpoints. Because obviously they're yelling at someone for littering on the street because they see the direct damage to their community, their neighborhood. They don't want their neighborhood to become dirty. So they say, hey, you can't litter here. But yet they don't see the hypocrisy of continuing to support a platform that spies on everyone like Facebook, that hurts all the members, that could potentially hurt all the members of the community. It's the exact same thing. The very reason they're yelling at that person for littering in their neighborhood is the exact same reason that they should get off Facebook. But yet, because their critical thinking skills are lacking, they see fault, huge fault, in one act, but no fault in a very similar act. So today, I find it fascinating that the very aspects of technology that you would hope would improve people's lives, that are being elevated in society, are those I think that are actually destroying the very fabric of society that held nomadic tribes together, that made them so strong, and that made people have such a strong sense of self and self-worth. And in fact, people said that, Junger said in his book, The Tribe, that the rates of suicide in tribal and small tribal communities, especially American Indian communities, was almost non-existent. And he said the only reasons that he discovered that people would kill themselves and commit suicide in American Indian tribes, he said he found one was like severe disfiguration from diseases like smallpox, where they were just so psychologically damaged they felt like they couldn't live because their faces were so disfigured and their psychology was so damaged that they killed themselves. But it wasn't from like depression, when like their health was fine, their looks were fine, everything else, like the types of reasons you see happening in modern society today as far as why people. So he said that was one. He said the only other one he found was when people got so old and the elderly felt they were like a burden, like they weren't able to keep up with the nomadic elements of the tribe, and they felt like they weren't able to really contribute and pulling their own weight. So he said those were the only two instances that you would really see any type. You wouldn't find it just for basic clinical depression, because she said that just didn't happen. But yet, in rich, what are considered wealthy societies, the instances and the of suicide are through the roof when we compare it to small nomadic tribes like this. And even, I guess, even when you look at, I remember reading something about the Amish and saying the Amish had very, very low rates of suicide. And again, I think it's because of that common sense of purpose towards a common, and struggle towards this common good. Because I know the Amish have things like called house raisings, where they help build a house. The whole community unites in an event called a house raising, in which they build a house for one family, and then they do it all over again for another family. So they have all these events in a very close-knit community that doesn't have much exposure in interaction with the outside world. So they're very insulated in that regard. And so even though they're insulated and in many aspects even isolated from outside communities that live adjacent to them, the fact that they have struggle that unites them for a common purpose and a common good keeps their mentality very, very strong. So unfortunately, I think social media, the countries in Southeast Asia, where I'm at right now, I think that have the highest usage rates of social media. If it's not already happening, I'm pretty certain that these countries are going to start manifesting the highest rates of psychoses and mental disorders among teenagers. And I would be shocked if that's not happening, say, in country, because I know like South Korea has very high rates of social media usage. Thailand, I'm not sure if Japan does or not, but the countries that do, I think, in the teenagers, you're going to see increasing rates of mental disorders and psychological disorders if that's not already manifesting right now. And also, I think that social media elevates the exact opposite behavior that you would see in tribal communities that united them. So, for example, social media promotes a lot of anonymity and cowardice as far as hateful comments of people hiding behind keyboards. That, this behavior would not only not be accepted and not be tolerated in a small communal tribe where there is no anonymity, but it'd be punished physically and violently. So people wouldn't be engaging in a psychologically to their own human development, like psychologically damaging to their own human development type of behavior. So that is the downside of I think, even though it's going to sound conspiratorial to a lot of people, I really do believe that there's been a push by those in power to push social media usage to such high levels because they understand the fact that it makes people feel more isolated and lonely, and it induces more psychological damage in teenagers. And lastly, before I move on, I just want to discuss people's blind acceptance, which has to do with the lack of critical thought development in institutional academia today, of what the mainstream media, and this is like in every country, what the mainstream media tells people to believe, because people don't understand how much mainstream media is controlled by all the top political and financial interests in their country, and that it is not objective, fair reporting, which astoundingly a lot of people believe it is. So, for example, I'm going to talk about the recent U.S. elections in which Donald Trump was elected president of the United States and the whole Russian hacking narrative. And I know a lot of people that listen to my podcasts and my vlogs are not American. So if you're not familiar with this narrative that has been pounded daily in the mainstream media for months on end to try to link Donald Trump to as a Russian agent or a Russian operative or sleeping with the enemy, like all these different narratives, but that's, I don't even look at Russia as the enemy as an American, but that's a whole different podcast. So I'm not going to get into that in this podcast. But just the fact that so many people are blindly obedient and compliant to the directives and narratives that mainstream media projects out there and distributes. And I've had a lot of discussions. Oh, I forgot to say before I move on, I'm sorry. The Russian hacking narrative was basically the Russian government, or it was the FSB, which is the modern iteration of what the KGB once was. That the FSB operatives are responsible for leaking damaging information about Hillary Clinton during the election campaign, so they unduly influence the outcome of the U.S. election, are responsible for Donald Trump, and that kind of snowballed into, Donald Trump's also a Russian agent, blah, blah, blah. He's working with Putin, and he's close friends with all the ex-KGB St. Petersburg, now FSB operatives in Russia, and that he's dangerous to national security in the United States. So all this stuff has happened, and I'm not even exaggerating, because if you're not familiar with this narrative, because you're not American, there is a organization called Project Veritas that has documented that since, I believe, don't take my word, but I'll put the link so you can go check the video out yourself. I believe it's since Donald Trump's been elected that CNN has mentioned Russia no less than 16,000 times in trying to connect Russia and Donald Trump together as having like this really close relationship, working and collaborative relationship, which actually I don't even think would be that bad if they did have a close collaborative relationship, because I think it's much it's much more conducive to global peace to have a working relationship, because collaboration or collaborative relationship doesn't mean you're sharing all your national security secrets with the other. It just means you're working together to try to establish global peace, which I think is better than the prospects of a nuclear war, in my opinion, although probably those in the military-industrial complex wouldn't agree with that opinion. But in any event, I want to make this crystal clear that this isn't a political issue, because the whole point of my podcast is that we shouldn't discuss things in terms of polarizing divisions that are based upon false paradigms that those in power have created, like left and right, Democrat versus Republican, and divisions of that nature. So we should just look at things that are right versus wrong. So you might think that certain things that Trump does is right, and you might hate other things he does and think that they are absolutely wrong, and that's okay, but that's a proper lens through which we should look at life. And so this is really not a political issue, but it's a media issue about people's blind obedience to news that is reported in the mainstream media, rather than any type of critical perspective applied to the news that is being distributed by the mainstream media. There has been a lot of this narrative that's been going on, and I just want to tell you some anecdotal stories, because I've talked to a handful of people that are Westerners, and not all are even American, some are British, that believe that Donald Trump is secretly collaborating with Russia and Putin against the national interests of the United States of America. And I say, well, why would you believe this? And they say, because I listen to credible news sources that repeatedly state this. And I say, who are your credible news sources? And they'll say, like CNN. And I say, well, why do you think CNN is credible? I said, and they'll just say, well, because CNN is a accredited news source, and they can't even see that their logic is circular. Like, circular logic is just wrong. You can't just say that the source is a credible news source and that's why you believe it, without actually backing the statement of why it's an accredited or credible news source. So then I'll ask them, why is it a credible news source? And it says, because they have a vetting process, and their vetting process, they wouldn't report news without vetting their news as credible. And again, I said, that's circular logic, okay? So I said, I've had some of these conversations before. I really looked into, because I don't really follow CNN, so I looked into some of their reports as far as the relationship that either Trump himself or his cabinet members had close relationships with Russian cabinet members and had these secret meetings that have been documented and proven. And I said, look, they're just... I went and I couldn't find any story in which they actually had documented evidence, because they were just quoting anonymous sources this, anonymous sources that. So then I went back to this guy and I said, have you ever checked what their sources are for these stories? I said, they're all anonymous. There's not a single source that they have named. And then this guy says, well, I know that they have to have multiple sources that say the same thing, so that's enough for me. And I said, look, I've looked at these stories that you told me to go look at, and their multiple sources are multiple anonymous sources. I have like 2 or 3 anonymous sources. I said, that is not a vetting process. And then I would argue with these guys, and I've had the same arguments with like 5 or 6 guys, and they would say, well, sure that is, because they have multiple anonymous sources. It's not the same anonymous source, so they can't have a high-level anonymous source. Well, look, I said, I could just make up a story. How do you know that story is true if the source isn't being named? Because if it's the truth and has nothing to do with, it's not going to hurt national security, why wouldn't these guys come forward and say, you could use my name? Because that's just like me saying I have a high-level anonymous source at NASA that tells me he has seen autopsies on alien bodies from different star systems. Would you believe that is true? And the person said, no, because that sounds like ludicrous. I want to believe that. And I said, well, why would you believe high-level anonymous sources that CNN is reporting? He said, because they have multiple. I said, that's circular logic. That is faulty logic. You can't keep saying that. And then the guy would say, well, then I have other news sources like the New York Times is saying the same thing. And the New York, but I said, I went and I looked at these other sources you're telling me. Look at New York Times. It's the same thing. They're replying. They're depending upon anonymous sources to report their links of Donald Trump to these Russian operatives. And again, I'm no Trump supporter because I consider myself an independent. I don't buy into this false paradigm that that certain people at the top political systems and nations create. I don't believe that that Republicans and Democrats are actually really that far apart in their ideology. I think they put on the show publicly, but behind doors they're making basically the same secret agreements and negotiations to stay in power, because that's all they care about, is being in power. And so I'm no Trump fan, and I'm just trying to get to the bottom of why people believe stories that have no credible evidence. And they would say, well, the New York Times is completely different, accredited news source, and they're saying the same thing. So I have my multiple sources. I said, you don't have multiple sources, because you got to look at these different mainstream media channels, and if they're funded by the same powers, by the same financial powers, or if they are, even if they're not funded by the same financial powers, I say, if they're not really providing any credible evidence, but say just their only backing, their only sources are anonymous sources, then you have no evidence. And these guys were like, come on, man. If they reported all these stories that had no evidence, how will the New York Times be around for, I don't know how long, I think the New York Times has been around for at least 100 years. How will they survive 100 years? And I said, again, that has nothing to do. Your critical thinking skills are so rudimentary and basic that longevity does not equal credibility, because there are definitely a lot of paradigms that have survived hundreds of years, which are false paradigms, which should never have survived. So it's just because the people in power were controlling these paradigms, they've been around for this long. I said, look at the U.S. Central Bank. That's been around for over 100 years, but is it helping American people? By your argument, it should be helping American people and making American people's lives better, but clearly is not. So that survived for over 100 years. Your argument that longevity equals credibility is not an argument driven by any critical thought whatsoever. So in some of these instances, because I can remember at least 5 or 6 arguments I had like this, where I could not convince these people that it was not fact. They would keep telling me it's a fact. It's a fact. It's not even speculation. CNN reported it. New York Times reported that. Multiple anonymous sources. It's a fact. And then at least 2 people I can remember got so emotional about it when all I was trying to do was trying to take them through their critical thought processes and point out that it was not fact. And they got so angry with me, like veins popping out of their neck, angry with me, that they just walked away from the conversation. And to me, I found that incredible, that critical thought is left out. It's so absent in the institutional academic process that you cannot have just a non-emotional discussion with someone, because I never raised my voice once in these conversations. And I wasn't getting emotional about it. I remained detached, as a logical, rational person would be about this. And I wasn't getting angry. Even though they got angry at me, their emotional reaction to our debate did not get me angry. Like, I just water off my back, and I just went on to the next conversation, where when I looked at them, they were still steaming over it. And that is just, I think that is the fault of the institutional academic system. So incredibly, like a month, or in some cases several months after I had these conversations with people, I'm going to go post on YouTube. So if you're listening to this on like iTunes podcast, go find this. It will just be under something like SK Wealth Academy podcast on my YouTube channel, Smart Knowledge U, and look for the links. The Veritas project, or is it Project Veritas, I believe, they planted some people undercover to go into the headquarters, CNN headquarters in Atlanta, to try to find out what this all Russian hacking thing was about. And I think they had like hidden cameras, so they didn't know the people that confronted, or actually in this case, the video I'm looking at, just one person, is John Bonifield, who was a CNN supervising producer that cornered this guy and asked him questions. And so I don't think he believed he was on record, so he's super honest. And they said, well, what about this Russian hacking thing? Do you really believe they kind of led him, but it did get his true opinions because they said it's kind of bullshit, right? And this guy said, yeah, it probably is bullshit because we have no smoking gun, no hard evidence, no giant proof that any of what we're saying is true. And so that I'm paraphrasing, but I'm not misleading you in any way, because if you go watch this video, this is what the CNN supervising producer said about this. And then he even went on to admit, he said, I probably shouldn't say this about my boss, but we covered this climate accord change against which Trump wasn't on board with. So he said, we covered that for a day and a half, but then he said, the CEO of CNN ordered us, go back to the Russia stuff. And he said, well, why would you do that? Why would you just cut away from that story and then just go back to the Russia stuff? And he said, because it's about ratings. It's about ratings. It's about money. And this I don't want to misquote him, so I'm going to read this. He said, but all the nice, cutesy little ethics that used to get talked about in journalism school, you're just like, that's adorable. That's adorable. This is a business. So he's basically saying they're whoring themselves out for money. So it's not about telling the truth. It's not about ethics. It's being about, if you have to be unethical because you're making more money, then be unethical. And just lead people and don't concern yourself with the truth. Just report stories that people want to hear, because people want to believe in the connection between Russia and Trump. So that's what they want to hear. This is what we're going to tell them, even though we have no credible proof for any of the stories we're putting out. And he did admit they have no credible proof. So that's amazing, because I wonder what these guys would say who had these arguments about, if I took this back to them, I showed them, look, you're saying CNN is this accredited news source, but the supervising producer said, nice cutesy little ethics. You're just like, that's adorable. That's adorable. This is a business. And that's a whole problem. Actually, before I even go on with the next statement, what I want to say is that if you look at some of the comments, and they may be pushed way down now, but here's one comment. It said, let me see. It said, the video had 1.8 million views 3 hours ago. Now it has 1.5 million. Are people traveling back in time again? And so I've been saying that for years. I've been saying that sometimes I see actually more comments and views on my channel in which I'm promoting truth and putting out truth about banking and finance and money. And because people, Google, if people think Google is ethical, that is just a joke. I always try to promote people using other search engines where the results of your internet searches are actually going to be more accurate, like DuckDuckGo.com. Animal duck, DuckDuckGo.com. I tend to use that. I tend not to use Google at all because I think Google is so biased, and Google censors so much, because I made this other video about just how Google is stripping all the criminal activity of banks from their searches, because they literally reduced by tens of millions of results over the years since the 2008 financial crisis. The results of in their search engines of criminal activities of like Bank of America, of Goldman Sachs, of JP Morgan. It's just ridiculous. Obviously, Google censors a lot of things in their search engines, and they're not a responsible, fair, and equitable source as a search engine. So I don't believe anyone should use them, because I saw that time and time again in which people were telling me, oh, you're just some conspiracy theorist, because, as my subscribers on my YouTube channel tripled, the amount of YouTube views were collapsing on the YouTube, and also the comments started collapsing as well. So it was really interesting, because I started doing some of my own personal investigation. I would ask my friends, hey, are you getting any notifications of these new videos I've uploaded to YouTube? And all of them would say, no, I haven't received any new notifications of any YouTube. I thought you would just quit your YouTube channel, because some of my friends told me they hadn't received any notifications in years of any new YouTube videos I posted on my YouTube channel. So one thing I would like people to do, if you're still listening at this point, is please do go comment. everyone that listens to this video, to this podcast, even though obviously I'm not going to get everyone that listens to comment, please just do post a comment, because I want to see what the discrepancy is between the people that actually listened to this podcast on YouTube and then the numbers that YouTube will put out, because YouTube has been censoring my video channel for years and years, where basically it's like I'm not incentive financially anymore, because they started demonetizing a lot of my videos years ago as well. So, excuse me, I was just taking a sip of coffee. So that's what I want to say as far as point number 2. So let's move on to point number 3. So point number 3, why I feel like people lack a good backbone as far as sticking to their principles today, is because a lack of faith and a lack of personal responsibility for their actions. So I think because of the lack of critical thought, which I think there's a deliberate stripping out of that in institutional academics today. So you basically have to self-educate. You have to engage yourself in a lot of education outside of institutional academics, because I believe most of your education will take place outside of institutional academia, as ironic as that sounds, because the social constructs that should support society, should make society a positive construct, really have been hoarded out by the people that control these constructs. So I've never said like banking is evil, but the way banking is executed is certainly evil in my mind, because the people have hoarded out just for money. So they've hoarded out to transfer the wealth of 99.9% of everyone in that nation to the 0.1% of people in that nation with zero labor. So the 0.1% aren't even working hard for their money. They built the banking system to be able to transfer the money of the 99.9% of people that live in that country to themselves, the 0.1% of the wealthiest in that country. So banking doesn't have to be that way. It's just the execution that has been hoarded out and made all about money, and made very immoral and evil and unethical. The same thing with media. The CNN supervising producers admitted that a lot of mass media, there's no ethics anymore. And he said people believe that there's ethics that are being applied to how to report news. He said, that's adorable. He's mocking people. He said, that's adorable. He's like, this is a business. And he's like, you're an idiot if you don't realize this is all about just making money. And so media, mainstream media has been hoarded out. So that's why forever I've been saying, you want real news, you got to go to independent media. And you got to go to media that is not involved in the mainstream media anymore. And as far as, that covers like banking, mainstream media. Same thing as politics. That's why earlier in this podcast I refer to the people that control government not as government officials, government executives, because it's all about money. It's not like government is really serving the people, like people that are looking for saviors like Barack Obama to come save people. You saw how that worked out, right? It wasn't about taking care and helping people, helping the poor in America like people foolishly believed. It's all about money. It's about helping the rich get richer and serving their gods, serving the wealthy and their masters. So it's always been that way. So I'm just not critical of Obama. I was critical of Bush and Clinton for doing the exact same thing, about serving the top 0.1% of the nation. So politics has been hoarded out that way, which leads me to the third point, which is faith and responsibility, because my faith comes from God. So anytime I mention God, I see this in a lot of other podcasts I listen to. Once people disagree, this is how soft people are. They disagree with one thing you say, they try to discredit everything else you said. They say, oh, I'm not listening to this podcast anymore if that person actually believes in God, because I don't believe in God, which is just a conclusion that has a complete absence of any critical thought whatsoever. So that's why it's so disheartening for me to see that critical thought has been totally stripped out of institutional academia. Because I have friends, for example, that are atheists, right? And I don't discredit everything that they say just because we have a difference of opinions in religious beliefs, right? So I can have completely intellectual conversations with them where they have a lot more knowledge, say, in certain topics. I listen to them and I learn from them. I'm not going to say I discredit everything because I don't believe, because we have one difference of opinion. So that's just ludicrous. Or just because people are driven by emotion and not critical thought when it comes to opinions like that. And it's the same thing like if people say that just like hate, detest Trump, right? And then they listen to a podcast, and then that podcaster says something that's kind of like pro-Trump. I've actually seen people in the comment section say, I'm out. Like, I really liked this podcast until that person started saying that Trump was good for America, and then I'm out because I'm not going to listen to a person that's stupid. Well, even if you disagree, right? Even if you think that Trump is hurting America, right? It doesn't discredit everything else intelligent that that person may have said, right? Prior to the opinion he gave and which you disagree. And it's just idiotic to then discredit everything else he said, where prior to that you agreed with that, with what he said. And then, you know, he may move on to a topic outside of politics after he finishes discussing Trump, and then you're not going to hear it, and he may have a lot of value to add to your life. So that is just what I find disheartening. So, you know, and here's the other thing just about people that say, well, you can't prove God's existence, so I'm not going to believe in people that believe in stuff you can't prove. Well, there's a lot of things people believe in that you can't prove, right? You can't prove alien life exists, but yet you can talk to a lot of people that don't believe in God and ask them, do you believe there's intelligent life somewhere in this universe? And they say, yeah, the universe is infinite, so it'd be stupid not to think that there's some kind of intelligent life out there, even though there hasn't been one shred of credible evidence that there's intelligent life out there. Just the probabilities say there are. And then I say, well, then how come you totally will discredit someone that believes in God, right? Because there's no evidence, it's the same thing. And then, I'm just giving you, playing all the devil's advocate arguments I can think of, just to say that if you actually sit down and have a conversation with someone that's based upon critical thought and not emotion, that you may be able to see certain perspectives and vantage points from other people that have different opinions from you, and you might actually learn something from them, and vice versa, right? That I may learn something from people that have different opinions from me for things I strongly believe in, they may not believe in. And rather than just walking away and having an emotional, visceral reaction from that and not wanting to talk to that person anymore, if you just get rid of those emotions and just rule yourself with rationality, then you may actually learn a lot from that other person, is all I'm saying. So that person may say, well, I'm just going by probability, right? There's a probability strong that there's intelligent life out there, so that's why I believe in it. But there's no probability, they're saying, that God exists. What's the probability? But then, you can argue that there is high probability, because there's certain mathematical ratios, like the golden ratio, that is found in so many things, found all throughout nature, found in flowers, the Fibonacci sequence, right? Found in aquatic life, found in seashells, found in the proportions of animals, insects, human bodies, right? So it would denote that there's a very, very high probability that there's a creator out there. So there's two schools of thought on that, right? So some quantum physicists said, well, it's almost like a computer program. So it seems like we're living in a computer simulation. So those are the two schools of thought. We're either living in a computer simulation, or there's a higher creator out there. So I could argue, you could argue either way. I tend to believe there's a higher creator out there. Other people say, hey, we're living in a computer simulation. But some people will say, it's ludicrous to say we're living in a computer simulation, right? So again, it's just your opinion. So you shouldn't have totally emotional reactions just to people's opinions, and then discredit everything else that person says. So the reason I believe that faith can be really, really important. It doesn't matter where your faith comes from. I'm just saying have faith, right? But faith, not faith alone, because like that's what the problem I had with the whole viral video, The Secret, right? They're just saying think positive and think for all these things and have this vision quest or vision board. I don't know what they called that thing. Make this vision board of everything you want in life and you'll get it. as long as you think about it every day and be positive. That's a bunch of garbage, because you got to take personal responsibility. You can't have that without taking any action, without actually putting in the work and working hard to obtain the things you want in life. You just can't dream about things, daydream, and then just think, oh, they're going to appear. So the thing that they don't put it in is what you got to pair it up with is personal responsibility and action. So that combined with faith, I think, can produce a lot of great things in your life. And here's why faith has done a lot of great things for me. So I'm just not saying, I'm just telling you can get your faith from different sources, but I'm just saying for me personally that my faith comes from a strong faith in God, right? But this faith gives me a lot of gratitude for what I have. So even though I want more in life, right? It's like I'm very satisfied with what I have right now. At this current moment, I feel very blessed for what I have. So I'm not going to try to stomp on other people to get more. I'm always going to take into consideration is what I'm doing to get more, creating good for the greater society. I'm not going to do something that's going to basically destroy humanity to get what I want, which is kind of the message that unfortunately is being portrayed even in institutional academia today. Just get yours, right? Because what those at the very top of the pyramid in politics and education and banking have done is create this narrative. It's a dog-eat-dog world out there, so you better get yours right now before it's too late to get yours. And you better do everything and anything possible to get yours without any consideration for the consequences of your actions. Have no consideration. You just better get yours now. And so I think like that kind of narrative and the way they've been able to so successfully create that narrative is by creating this feeling of learned helplessness among society. Like you have no choice right now because they've involuntarily, right, heaped economic struggle upon people by using central bankers to destroy the purchasing power of fiat currency by plunging a lot of people into economic struggle. And when people are faced with these involuntary tragedies, that puts a lot of people, depending upon what is in yourself, your character, but it does plunge a lot of people into the state of learned helplessness when it comes involuntarily. So many people say, oh, I have a problem with organized religion. Well, who made organized religion? Who made organized religion? It's man. It's a man-made construct. So it's the execution of religion. I think even a lot of people that said they have a severe problem with religion don't actually have a severe problem with the concept of God. They have a severe problem with the execution of religion, which I can, as a man, as a logical, critical thinking man, can listen to someone who gives me those reasons and also agree, even though I believe in God, because I can believe there's you look throughout history, you look at the Spanish Inquisition, there's terrible execution of religion throughout history. You look at the Vatican that kept basically not punishing priests that were molesting little kids, and that's terrible execution of religion. So I think when you look at the horrible things that have been done in the name of religion, we're talking about execution, but it has nothing to do with the actual existence of God, which I just argue that, the two common arguments against that, there's a lot of logical arguments for it as well. So I believe that a lot of the problems people have, and they keep saying, it's with the execution. I will sometimes agree with people when they talk about the faults of religion, right? Because, the religion always talks about not hoarding resources, about giving and helping out the poor, but the Vatican is one of the richest institutions in the entire world. Like, they have way more gold than any single person in the entire world. They have so much gold. It's unfathomable for a religious organization to hoard all that gold, and when they could be using it to help people. They have priceless pieces of artwork at the Vatican. They have, again, huge amounts of just even intellectual property of literature they're not sharing with the rest of the world. So you got to question all these things. Why? What is it all for? They have apparently the most real estate holdings in the entire world of any organization. So why the hoarding of all this wealth? Because it seems contra to what religion is about. So people have to understand when they have these criticisms, I will agree because about when they have criticisms like this, because that is what I'm criticizing these constructs about. And so you can understand that, yeah, banking can be used to help people. Yeah, if banking actually put in sound money and they didn't put in a debt-based monetary system that put everyone in the world into debt, and that's our whole goal, is to put people in as much debt as possible. So you got to dig your life out and spend your whole life digging out of debt so you can't compete with them. Yeah, then that's evil, but it doesn't make the construct evil itself. It's the execution that's evil. So if you can understand that's the execution of banking that's evil, it's not actually banking itself that could be evil, because if you had the right people leading the banking industry, forming sound money instead of money based upon nothing except digits, where that can be manipulated to control people and to put people into debt because you're creating money as debt with a debt component in it, then you would understand it. And you understand the same thing with politics, right? Government doesn't necessarily need to be bad, but most governments, the way they're run today, is the execution of greedy, power-hungry, arrogant, uncompassionate men leading government that makes the execution of government terrible. But if government actually were serving people and trying to make people's lives better, and that's all they're doing, and they're running the military-industrial complex not to enrich themselves and make themselves billionaires, but actually just running the military-industrial complex just to prevent and protect the homeland, and they weren't going to other countries to try to steal other people's resources and just using it to counter aggression against invaders of the homeland, right, for the purpose it should be used, then government could be great. So it's just an execution. If people can understand that, if you can be logical and rational to understand what I'm saying, then it should also translate into religion. You should understand those people that see religion, it's the execution that's been so bad, but it's been the execution because who rises to the top of everything? Very powerful, wealthy people that want to use a construct to not only control other people, but to enrich themselves at the expense of everybody else. So that's how they pollute it. But if you could talk to people that are intelligent enough to see through these constructs and these manipulations and see that the execution is terrible, but the actual construct itself is not bad. Let me say that for me, if we're going to distill religion down to its purity, I would say just let's use the golden rule: treat others how you want to be treated, right? So in that instance, if you wouldn't want other people hating on you and executing these ad hominem attacks on you, saying you're an idiot without really contributing a rational, logical argument and criticism, constructive criticism that will actually help that person, then don't do it to other people. It's simple as that, right? And so that kind of look and that kind of distillation of religion is like, hey, let's look at how we can look at religion in a way that helps the community, to have a belief system that will help the community, that will bind people together instead of tearing them apart. Then I think you can't really argue against a person's religious beliefs if you look at someone that is smart enough to see religion in that manner. But the problem I see as far as why a lot of people can never get to that point is because they don't seek a diversity of opinions, right? They don't really want to go outside of their tribal affiliations to see more. Because, okay, I can remember just from talking about another topic that people get very emotional about, and there's really a severe lack of critical thought, is sports, right? So those of you know, because I've spoken about this topic briefly before, that when I was a lot younger, I used to watch a lot more sports than I do now, but I just believe it's not an utter waste of my time, because I still do watch some basketball, watch a little bit of football, and mostly watch MMA and UFC, because that's the main thing I enjoy. But I won't spend like an entire afternoon watching football as I did when I was like in high school, because I think that's a complete waste of my time, and I'd much rather use that time to work out, exercise, improve the quality of my life. Because you look at a lot of sports fans are so out of shape. I'm like, why wouldn't you take those hours and hours, those entire afternoons you devote to watching sports, and just maybe watch sports for like 90 minutes and then take the other 90 minutes and work out and improve your own quality of life, because there's no question that being in better shape will improve your quality of life, because it improves the way you feel about yourself, it improves your self-esteem, it improves your ability to engage in more activities like go on these strenuous, difficult hikes to viewpoints where you see beautiful things in life. So it keeps you healthier when you're older, and so you could be more active. And so it does improve the quality of your life. But getting back to the point of a lot of people just stay within their tribes and don't seek out diversity of opinion, so it prevents them from really understanding that's not a lot of constructs of society that are evil, but it's the execution that's evil. I'll give you a perfect example, like when Kevin Durant, right, he was in the NBA, for those of you that are not American or don't really give a crap about sports. So good on you if you don't give a crap about sports, because you have a lot more time to actually do things that enhance the positivity of your own life and your own personal growth. That when he moved from Oklahoma City to Golden State Warriors, a lot of Oklahoma City fans just spewed venom and hatred upon him and would say that he was a coward. To talk about someone that just wants to improve the quality of his life. Because I remember one time when he's interviewed about Oklahoma City, people say, "Do you like it?" And he said, "Yeah, I love it, but small town." He said, and people say, "What do you do for entertainment?" He said, "I go to the Apple Store a lot, because that's kind of like the center of town." He's like, "I hang out at the Apple Store a lot." So if you're thinking you have opportunity to go to the Bay Area, right? Because I used to work in Oakland. But I worked in Oakland back in the day when it was a lot rougher, hadn't been yet gentrified. And even though I worked in one of the better parts of Oakland, Lake Merritt, I remember one time when I had a friend come into town and we went to like a house party in Oakland. She got terrified because I took a wrong turn, because she thought the neighborhood looked like something out of a horror movie. And I was like, well, this just looks like Philly, where, I lived for a long time. So what are you getting so terrified of? It's pretty funny. And again, that just comes from a diversity of like experiences, because she had never really gone into parts of town like that, where I was like, hey, this is just normal, because half of Philadelphia looks like this, so don't get scared, we're fine, we're in my car, just lock your doors if you think anyone's going to attack us, but we'll be fine. Because I gone to Brooklyn too, before Brooklyn was like Brooklyn of today. I gone to Brooklyn when you'd be accosted walking down the street like every 10 meters for cocaine, heroin, whatever, like by drug dealers, right? And so it's really interesting if you don't have the diversity of experiences. You realize, okay, so yeah, parts of town are dangerous, but the danger's kind of over-exaggerated in the media, because I've been in parts of town like that. Nothing has ever happened to me, but it probably is somewhat where my faith in God comes into play too, because nothing ever happened to me in these areas where, because like in Philadelphia, okay, I expressly sought out differences in perspective when I was really young, because I knew it would contribute a lot more to my intelligence and to my ability to see life for how it really is, instead of believing just the constructs, or not the constructs, but the false paradigms that those in power want to build for us and wanted us to believe in when I got older. So after I left University of Pennsylvania, I went and worked for a healthcare company that was basically located, all their health centers were located in the hardest parts of Philadelphia. So they're located like in North Philadelphia at 20th and Hunting Park Avenue. They're located at Southwest Philadelphia at 55th and I want to say Larchmont, but it's not Larch. 55th and Woodland Avenue. They're located at where else? 19th and Spring Garden, which is actually very close to one of my favorite hangouts when I was like a lot younger, down at 11th and Spring. I think it was, no, 6th and Spring Garden at Silk City. That's actually where I ran into spoken word artist Ursula Rucker, who's done a lot of work with the Roots. So, what's up, Ursula? If you're listening, you're probably not. I doubt it, but if you are, shout out to you. I hope all is going well with you. So I met a lot of great people at Silk City. I have a lot of fond memories of Silk City. So I went into a lot of these neighborhoods that were really harsh. And it's funny because I also remember that one of the things I'm going to talk about is like joining the right tribes and the solutions. I don't want to get too much into this, but I remember when I also trained in martial arts that I saw this guy, Kevin Waters, too. What's up if you're listening, Kevin? Who at first I avoided like the plague when I first started working out in this particular dojo, because he was this really muscular, big dude, maybe, I don't know, I'd say he was about 220, pretty solid muscle, about 6'2", 6'3", and shaved head, goatee, just looked very, very badass and looked like a very hard guy. And he always had a scowl on his face, right? So he's very unapproachable, at least like from the very superficial outside judgment. Looked like very unapproachable. But then when I got to know him, because we started doing a lot of training outside of class together, man, one of the nicest, sweetest, most soft-spoken guys you'd ever know. So, I told him, like, hey, why do you always have this scowl on your face? And he would say, what? It's like, I'm walking around with a scowl on my face all the time. I was like, yeah, you do, man. You walk around with a scowl on your face like you just want to kill someone all the time. And he said, oh, man. He's like, man, I'm sorry about that. That's probably just a product of where I live. And I said, where you live? And he told me, like, this neighborhood in North Philly. And I was like, yeah, I know North Philly has a reputation, because I also work in North Philly times of being, like, really, really rough. And I remember one time in North Philly when I took subway to work in one of our satellite offices, I came up and there's shell casings everywhere, like literally probably at least 40, 50 shell casings, and there's like 10 cop cars, and I came up and they told me I just missed the shootout between like drug dealers and themselves. So I know, yeah, that North Philly's rough, man, because I've walked around too in those neighborhoods and I've seen places, and I swear it looks like Band of Brothers, like bombed out neighborhoods. I'm like, what is going on? They're literally like 4 or 5 story buildings where the whole front looks like it was bombed out. Like you can see into the buildings. I'm like, what is going on in this neighborhood? It's crazy. It looks like a war zone in Bosnia or something. And he told me that his biggest fear was being swatted. And he was telling me this like 15 years before swatting even became the term for what it was. So this is basically just unidentified, like police forces coming in to your home. Like swatting actually had to do with SWAT forces coming to your home, unmarked, not identifying themselves, drawing their guns because some idiot in your neighborhood wanted to get back at you and just said you had like 2 kilos of coke in your house, and he just come kick down your door in the middle of the night. You don't know what's going on. My friend Kevin said he always slept with a gun by his bedside. He said, I wouldn't know what to do because I wouldn't know these guys were breaking in my home to kill me. I was like, man, stuff is really that bad in your neighborhood? And he said, yeah, things are crazy. He's like, I don't walk around anywhere without a knife. And I was like, man, that's crazy. I was like, who would want to attack this guy? He's like 6'3", 225, all muscle. And he said, like, people still mess with him in his neighborhood. So I understood. And the more and more I understood things about different, just different people that had different living situations than myself, because eventually just even the conversations I had with Kevin were invaluable to when I started mentoring at 23 years old. I started mentoring these kids that were living in the same neighborhoods that Kevin told me they had seen people, like they're literally 14-year-old kids that told me they had seen their friends shot and die right in front of them. At least maybe be able to relate to them in some sense that I had friends that had gone through what they had gone through. So I wasn't so removed from their situation that they just, when I first started mentoring them, I was like, man, how am I going to relate to these kids? Because they're just going to think I have nothing in common. They're just going to push me to the side. But I eventually gained their trust. And it was a great, great learning experience. Even though I was mentoring them, I learned a lot from them. And I took those experiences from them because they were like 14 going on 45, because they'd seen so much in life already and gone through so much in life, that when I was able to really connect with these guys and build a foundation where they trusted me and really started letting me in, so I understood everything, then I understood that they're just like all of us. They're just like people. They have dreams of getting out of their neighborhood. They don't want to live in these circumstances where they always have to worry about someone stabbing them or shooting them on the way walking to school, which is just a crazy way to live, or even in school, because one of the satellite offices was in a healthcare center in one of these schools in Philly. And the first time I went there, I was like, what is going on? Because the school system was actually like a prison. They were actually full-time Philly PD. I'm not talking about some rent-a-cop. These were not full-time workers there, but they were working as a second job, but they were Philly police officers that were working there. They would walk me. They had to come to one end of the hallway because the door was locked when I wanted to walk in. They open it up, just like in some, prison, and in some wing of a prison. They would shut it behind me because it was locked. They would walk me down to the other end of the hallway, open up the door, and shut it behind me, until I make it to the health center. And then there are times like nurses would tell me, oh yeah, kids come in here bleeding, stabbed, and stuff, and we treat kids like that. And I was like, man, this is just crazy. Like, who grows up in situations like that? But then I took everything I learned from that situation, when I started mentoring ex-gang members in LA. So it really helped me bond with them as well. So these perspectives, like when people start criticizing like Kevin Durant and calling him a bum and a coward, that is just ludicrous. I'm sorry, I totally digressed and went off the beaten path here. But the point I want to make is that if you're KD, right, you could live in a situation that your quality of life is going to get better because you have Oakland, which is on the come up right now, right? And you could cross the Bay Bridge, because I also lived in San Francisco. Go to San Francisco, which is a great, great city. A lot of really smart, intelligent people. The best conversations I probably had in the entire United States, just out in a social setting with strangers, was in San Francisco. Beautiful, beautiful city as well. The only thing I hated about San Francisco was the earthquake threat. But, you could just drive across the Bay Bridge or take the BART and be in San Francisco, or you could live in San Francisco and commute to the Bay Area. And you have beautiful cities, beautiful climate too, as well, and much more to do. Just very like a richer cultural setting, more theater, more art, more things to see, outdoor hiking. And the Presidio was awesome. We could walk along the cliff, see the bay, see the views of the Golden Gate Bridge. You could hike up to areas in Marin County that would overlook the Bay Bridge and were just phenomenal, beautiful. You could drive 5 hours and be in Yosemite National Park. Maybe, go watch the climbers free climbing out there, like Alex Honnold, free climb El Capitan. Just like a lot more to do from Oklahoma City. If that was your own family, in a second you take that deal and you move. But yet, you're going to criticize someone for doing the exact same thing 100 times out of 100 you would do for your own family. And that is just an absence of critical thought where you're just driven by emotion. So that's what I really don't like about this absence of critical thought, when people are always being coaxed into having these emotional, visceral responses instead of really any type of rational response to things. So the people at the top that run this political system, that run the legal system, that run the banking system, that are running the drug wars, and say they're fighting the drug wars when they're profiting from drug wars, they divided us in a way that really is reaching like the apex of conflict. And the irony about it all is that if you are not in the 0.1% to the 1% of the wealthiest, most powerful people in this world, then we should be united on the same side against the evil people that are at the 0.1% to 1% of the most powerful and wealth. And I'm not just defining it by wealth. I'm not just saying if they're extremely wealthy, they're evil. But I'm talking about the people that are creating more conflict in this world, creating more terrorism deliberately in this world, because people don't understand the origins of terrorism at all. All you need to do is just, if you're really interested, then search the internet for Brzezinski and Mujahideen in Afghanistan, and you'll see that he was integral in the rise of extreme radical Islam to the forefront, and that he was responsible for a lot of the eradication of the moderate Muslim population. That it was Brzezinski. And then you have, of course, Mika Brzezinski, that's on CNBC now or whatever the channel is. So it's really ironic to me and really disheartening, because a lot of people don't see that we're being played by puppets and that we're being positioned like puppets, and even worse, more so even, you know how you can manipulate really young children, like 3-year-old boys, to start a fight if you really want to, because their intellect hasn't been developed enough to understand what you're doing to them. That is what we are allowing, and willingly allowing the people at the very top of this pyramid of power and this period of economics in the world to do to us. And we're not even trying to fight it. So it seems like we're not even human enough anymore to settle our differences in a civilized way. All you need to do is go to the comment section in YouTube and see how people are so evil towards each other and so inhuman, and just engaging in ad hominem attacks that have no basis in logic, have no basis in critical thought. And you have to realize that those that are running the government banking paradigm in the world today are evil, and you have to think of where are they getting their power from. And they're getting their power by worshiping evil entities. But it doesn't even matter if you don't believe this. If you just look at the vast majority, and I'm not saying the people that subscribe to my channel, because I understand that most of the people that follow my channel are at the upper echelon of critical thinking in society. But if you look at how most people in the world, if you look at their reactions to how they disagree with someone, just by answering this question: is my response to this disagreement progressing the conflict, or my disagreement towards more universal good for all of humanity, or is it helping spiral the disagreement downwards into hate and violence and belittling of humanity? And you will find that the vast majority of comments on YouTube, whenever there's a disagreement, falls into the latter category, not the former category. And I don't think you would find one person in the world that thinks he or she is truly without fault or has never made a mistake in their lives, outside of maybe the upper echelon of the most narcissistic people, like I said, that are running this world. But even though we can come to this rational agreement that no one is perfect, the moment a lot of us discover someone holds a different opinion from us, we can't seem to handle this difference in a compassionate manner, and a lot of us will start hurling epithets and even racial epithets towards each other, or denigrating each other's intelligence, and just conducting ourselves like animals in a way that intensifies hatred towards each other at worst. And at best, many will just say, I'm done listening to you, because they can't handle any type of disagreement, even though we can all rationally say no one's perfect. So if we can't understand that this hate and conflict is being manufactured by the very people that we're trying to get under we're trying to escape their subjugation, and we need to understand that they are manufacturing this hate. And we have to understand that probably I would not be surprised if you find a very, very high correlation from people that receive a lot of their news and a lot of their opinions from mass media, and the amount of the lack of compassion they can feel for anyone that disagrees with them. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a direct correlation between those two, because it seems like the mass media is just feeding into this conflict, this conflict between right and left, between different political parties, whether it's like the different political parties in France or the UK or the US, Christians versus Muslims, Muslims versus Buddhists, Christians versus Buddhists, liberal versus progressive, liberal versus conservative. Because you have to understand the mass media in the mainstream media, they certainly aren't discussing the origins of these conflicts, because the very people that control mass media are the ones creating the conflicts, and they don't want you to understand the origins, because then we discover that they're the ones creating them. And so when you look at, like what I said, the direct links of someone like Brzezinski to the Mujahideen in Afghanistan and to creating Al-Qaeda, Mujahideen that became Al-Qaeda, became ISIS. And you understand it comes from Western politicians. And then you look at people like Kissinger that have always been meddling in U.S. politics, that have said that military men are like dumb, savage animals to be used by the people at the top like him for their own purposes and then thrown in the garbage pile. And I don't understand, because again, I'll put links in description so you can go see and confirm for yourself that what I'm saying is true. I don't understand people that are serving in the military that would read something like this from Kissinger and then continue to serve in the military when he knows exactly what he thinks of them, what the true savage like Kissinger and the true evil person like Kissinger thinks of them, and then the evil purposes that he's using them for. So, and then if you look at someone like Zuckerberg, that the CEO of Facebook, that's running experiments on Facebook and changing postings on people's Facebook walls to directly manipulate them and see if he can't make them more depressed and more angry. And then I don't see how people can really disagree with what I'm saying in this podcast, because the proof is out there. If you only just go look, and you only don't even have to go look for yourselves, because I'm going to put the links, like I said again, below on the YouTube podcast. So if you want to find these links and go read for yourself, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, just go find this podcast on YouTube, because I'm telling you, things are vastly different than when I was a kid. It wasn't like this 20 years ago. And I believe the people at the very top are doing this because, like I said, they're masters in psychology. They've studied and understood everything there is to understand about psychology. And they've also, I am positive, they're aware of those experiments that have been done with rats, where they show that fears can be passed on not only to first generation but second generation rats, where they did experiments where they shocked rats when they were exposed to the scent of a certain flower, and then took the first generation rats, they bred those rats that they conditioned to have this fear, and then they found the first generation rats also had an irrational fear of the scent of this flower. Irrational from the point they weren't shocking the first generation rats they had. And the rats before them never had a fear of the scent of this flower. And then they found it was even passed on to the second generation. And I'm sure that those at the top are trying to make us as hateful towards each other, to create all these, that's why when the mainstream media discusses conflicts, they never discuss right and wrong. You notice they always try to discuss left versus right, progressive versus liberal, because they want to force people into categories. Like if you don't belong to one, you got to belong to one. Because if they can force you into a category, then they can force you into hating each other, instead of just trying to figure out morality from the perspective of right and wrong. They never discuss anything from the point of right and wrong, because that would dissolve a lot of these fake conflicts that they're in these fake categories they want to push everyone into. That would eliminate that also. They don't discuss things ever in terms of right and wrong, but they only discuss them in terms of these fake categories they create to create more conflict, because the people, they think if they can make us as hateful towards one another as possible, then they will, then they know they might have a chance of controlling us for generations to come, because that hate will be passed on genetically, and these fears will be passed on genetically to your kids and to your grandkids, and that's how they're going to maintain control over us. So the solution to all of this is love. If you're not discussing disagreements or conflicts in a way that is positive and progressing the problem towards a peaceful solution, you might as well be working for the Kissingers, the Brzezinskis, the Rockefellers, the Diamonds, the Blankfeins, the Gullivers, the Gates of this world, because you're doing their dirty work for them. And instead of making this world a more harmonious world, full of love, full of understanding, full of harmony, working towards a common good, our struggles are based in hatred, which is ridiculous because we're being played by puppets like those above us. And I'm really sorry if I've been redundant in a lot of this, but it's so important to understand that if we're not working towards understanding, if we're not doing things, reacting towards disagreements in a way that we wouldn't want other people that disagree with us to react in that manner towards us, we're doing a disservice to all of humanity. We have to understand. I'm not like someone that's just saying, oh, let these evil people keep doing their evil because, I'm not being soft in that. And anyone that knows me knows I'm not being soft in any regard. And I'm not trying to portray softness towards people. But I'm saying for those that should be working together, that's what I'm saying. For those that should be working together, if what you're doing and the way you react in your speech, because speech can be very powerful, is really tearing society apart and tearing the portions of society. Because remember, if you're not in the 0.1%, the 99.9% should be bonding together. If we're not, looking at solutions in a rational way without spewing hate that really can progress us towards finding a solution that is peaceful, that's not going to divide us, then like I said, you might as well be on the side of the Jamie Dimons and the Lloyd Blankfeins and the Henry Kissingers and the Bill Gates out there, and all the people that are spewing hate out there and that are really misanthropic, because these people hate humanity, because you can see from the way they're destroying humanity that they hate humanity. So that is the message that I think is really important to get across. You might as well be Janet Yellen, working with Janet Yellen to try to destroy humanity, rip apart the fabric of society. Because, as I said, from Sebastian Junger, if you look at it, I don't believe that. I mean, there's yin and yang in everything, right? There's good. Everyone has good in them. Everyone has the capacity for evil in them. So the people at the very top also know that, and they're exploiting the evil side of people, and they're manipulating us to exploit that side. But as Sebastian Junger said in his book Tribe, when people really struggle, you can see the best of people too. You can see the best, because things are going to get worse economically. I'm really sorry to say that, but we haven't even seen the tip of the iceberg as far as what the people at the very top of banking and politics have planned for the rest of us, because they were going to bring these bubbles crashing down on our heads, the housing bubbles, the stock market bubbles, the bond bubbles, and they're going to destroy a lot of families financially, and they're going to be laughing all the way to the bank when they do this, and they're going to be imposing a lot more struggle upon us. So we better realize what they're doing to us right now and how they're manipulating us into hatred. And before that happens, we better realize that. So when this greater economic struggle happens, that we can actually bond together in a harmonious way, in a way in which we love our brothers and sisters instead of hate our brothers and sisters, which is what they're trying to push us into. Because if we don't realize that before they destroy all of the financial structures and pillars of society, then, man, we are going to just be reduced to savage animals toward each other. Because right now they are reducing us to the worst forms of ourselves instead of the best forms of ourselves. So they are reducing us to not wanting to discuss, talk to, look at people that have one single different thought and opinion from us. And even animals treat humans better, because you think of a dog, if you're trying to housebreak a dog, and say you think your dog broke something, but they didn't really break it. Maybe it was your kid that broke it, and you spank your dog with a piece of newspaper. That dog will sulk away and will not want anything to do with you. But the minute you show that dog love again, he's going to love you unconditionally. And humans aren't even like that. If you punish someone for doing something they didn't do, man, they're going to hold a grudge for you a lot longer than even a dog will. So don't let these people at the top, these evil, heartless, misanthropic people at the top, turn us exactly into them. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to turn us into them. And all you need to do, like I said, is go on YouTube and look at the comments, and they're succeeding. So please spread this podcast to everyone you know. So, because the first step is recognition, to not allow them to do that to us. Is we have to recognize and we have to spread the word to as many people so as many people can recognize what they're doing to us, and we can replace these gut react because they're basically appealing to our reptilian brains. You know, back when it was kill or be killed, and that's how they're really putting at us and pitting us against each other. So hopefully, I hope that all of you have been able to extract just a little bit something. Even if you disagree with most of what I said, or if you agreed with most of what I said, find people that disagree with most of what I said and have these conversations to really broaden our perspectives, to broaden our individuality. Because I think the one thing that institutional academia and also social media has been so successful at is to destroy our individuality, to destroy our creativity, to destroy our diversity of opinions. Because social media is manipulating our opinions to try to create people that think uniformly. Same thing with institutional academics. They want to create young adults that are clones that think exactly the same about every single topic, which I think is very dangerous for the survival of humanity, because we don't want to become people that are very extremely easy to manipulate, which clones that think exactly alike are very easy to manipulate, and that is what is going on. So we should embrace our differences, but yet find that we can live harmoniously and not allow these differences to divide us like those at the top are so intent on doing. So please do pass this on to all of your friends, all of your family members, if you think they get anything out of it. And it's probably even best to pass it on to those that you think will get nothing out of it, because maybe just one thing they listen to and hear in this podcast will plant a seed that will open up their mind and allow us to live harmoniously together and to embrace the diversity of our opinions, to embrace our differences instead of allowing those above us to use our differences to destroy us. So again, if you want to support me on Patreon, please do check out my Patreon account, which is SKWealthAcademy. Please do follow me on Snapchat at SKWealthAcademy. But remember always to opt out of that creepy Snapchat feature of Snapchat maps. And always remain intensely curious. Until next time, so long.